Hey there, AP Government students. Just wanted to finish up the interest groups notes with you. So I'm sorry that we're not able to meet together by Zoom today, but I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of the interest groups notes, and that'll finish up these. And then when we get back together on Tuesday, we will get into media, and we'll spend a couple of days talking about the media, which is always fun. So we finished up here on Thursday. We talked about these two Supreme Court cases. Just a reminder, we saw them last chapter: Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United. Citizens United being the big one that opened the door to super PACs, identifying money donated to and spent by these independent nonprofit political corporations as being protected free speech. We looked at the stand by your ad rule. You have to identify yourself when you're making a political ad, either as the candidate or as an outside group. And we talked about the revolving door with former members of Congress returning after a year to become lobbyists, and then sometimes going from lobbying to government, either in the executive or legislative branches. So just a little bit more into some details about interest groups. As far as membership of an interest group, most groups charge some form of dues. Typically you pay to become a member, but they might send you like a sticker or something, bumper sticker, so you can identify yourself as a member. But usually you're paying dues, and that is going to cover the overhead. That's going to cover the just sort of the basic functions of the group to make sure that it can exist. If they need office space or a full-time staff or anything like that, dues are going to help them cover those expenses. Political donations are different. Remember, the interest group and its PAC, its political action committee, have to be separate. So dues are just going to pay for the basic expenses of the group, and then they might ask you to donate separately to their PAC, which they can then donate to political candidates. But those two sets of funds have to be kept separate. And then the types of people who are more likely to join interest groups, it's the same kind of stuff we've been seeing all along. Older people, people with higher socioeconomic status, so higher income, higher wealth, people who are more educated. These are the kinds of people who are more likely to join. If you're more politically savvy, more politically informed and engaged, if you have higher political efficacy, you are more likely to be a member of an interest group. Remember, this is a linkage institution, something that's designed to connect citizens to the political process. So if you've got citizens who are suspicious of any sort of social cohesion, any sort of social activity, they're going to be less likely to join an interest group. And then a few of the challenges that come along with interest groups. A big one is called the free rider problem. The free rider problem is the fact that people who don't pay to help support an interest group can still benefit from that interest group's success. So the fact that you and I are breathing clean air is in part due to work done by environmental interest groups, or the fact that we attend desegregated schools is in part due to the work done by interest groups. But we may never have paid into any of those interest groups. We may never have joined them, paid dues, donated money, but we can still benefit from their success. So every American on some level is a free rider, because we're not all supporting every interest group, and we're still getting benefits from the work that they're doing, even if we don't really care about them. So the free rider problem is one. And then you've got these two that are kind of related: unequal distribution of resources. Some interest groups are older, more well-known, naturally appeal to people with higher income or who are more willing to invest in them. And so not every interest group on every side of an issue is going to have access to the same level of resources. And therefore, you get these larger, more powerful, more vocal interest groups that are able to accomplish a lot more. Kind of going along with that, these larger, older, more established, wealthier interest groups are going to have better access to the people actually making policy. We've seen this before. You've seen this exact image before. This is the old iron triangle. Remember, the iron triangle is made up of three parts. You have a congressional committee that deals with a particular issue. You have the bureaucratic agency or the executive agency that is responsible for enforcing policy over that issue. And then you have a relevant interest group that is interested in that issue. So we've seen this relationship before. We saw it in the legislative branch chapter. We saw it in the bureaucracy chapter. Now we're seeing it for a third time. So it is important because you're seeing it three times. But as we've talked about, interest groups and their PACs are going to offer electoral support, right? A PAC is going to donate money to candidates, especially incumbents, friendly incumbents on a relevant congressional committee to get their support on an issue. And then the congressional committee is going to be responsible for advancing or defeating legislation. And once policy gets made, it's up to the bureaucracy to enforce it. And you can see that relationship here. So the interest groups can also lobby bureaucratic agencies and try to get friendly regulation. So we talked about the revolving door before. One thing that is common is for former members of Congress, once they lose re-election or decide to retire, they can, after a year, go to an interest group and make a bunch of money as a lobbyist or sitting on some corporate board. It's also not uncommon for former lobbyists to find themselves in bureaucratic agencies. So you get a little bit of movement there too. So there's a little bit of a shell game going on here where all these people all sort of know each other and move around throughout various jobs here. So each part of the triangle provides something for the other part. We've used the term issue networks before. College Board promised years ago that they would start using this term issue networks instead of iron triangles. And they clearly lied through their teeth because we've seen iron triangles since then. So just understand, sometimes you'll hear issue networks where instead of three pieces, you might add in something else: media, business, academia, religious organizations, whatever that may be. And then down at the bottom, how do most Americans feel about interest groups? Interest groups really at their fundamental level represent pluralist democracy. Interest groups are this idea, they're part of what Madison and Federalist 10 would have called factions, that I alone don't have that much of a voice in the political process. But if I can get together with other like-minded people, our collective voices can be greater than each of them individually. So if we pool our resources, we can actually be louder. We can be a squeakier wheel than we would be if it was just us. So the most effective interest groups might represent a policy position that is unpopular with most Americans, but by being loud and lobbying effectively, these interest groups can still get the policy goal they want, even if it's not very popular. And that's pluralist democracy. That's many small groups competing for power. Someone used the word icky when we were talking about interest groups today. And I liked that word so much that I actually added it here because that is how most Americans feel about it. There's nothing illegal about it, but there's still things about interest groups and PACs and super PACs and campaign donations that all kind of feels a little gross. So it may not necessarily be illegal, but that doesn't mean we have to like the way that it feels. So if you ask Americans in general, do you believe interest groups, or sometimes you'll hear the term special interests, do you believe that they have too much power? Most Americans will say, yes, absolutely, they have too much power and we should reduce that power. But most Americans feel very positively about the particular interest groups of which they're members. So let me say that one more time. In general, Americans think that interest groups or special interests have too much power and influence, but Americans feel very positively about the groups that they're members of. So it's another one of those, yes, it's a problem. Oh, but not mine. They're great. They do good work. And last but not least, just a quick reminder of some strategies that interest groups use when they are trying to influence policy. Because remember, that's their number one goal, influence policy. So making campaign contributions through their PAC, their Political Action Committee. Remember, that's a sort of separate group. They have separate budgets. So the PAC will raise money and then contribute it to political campaigns. It's common for interest groups to endorse or rate candidates. So just to give you an example, the NRA has rated the candidates who are running in the Georgia runoff. So they gave David Perdue, the Republican, an A. They gave Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, an F. In the other Senate race, they gave Kelly Loeffler, the Republican, an A, and they gave Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, an F. None of that should be very surprising, but yeah, so they're just they're trying to inform their members, hey, here's how we feel about these candidates. And in both of those Senate races, the NRA endorsed the Republican candidate. So if you're an NRA member and you're not sure who to vote for, you can go to their website and you can find who did the NRA endorse if that's the most important issue to you. Or if you, I've talked before about the Virginia Beach Educators Association, the VBEA. They also endorse candidates. They endorsed local government candidates for mayor, for city council, and for school board. So if education is your number one issue, but you aren't sure who all these people are, and it's nonpartisan election, so you don't know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat, you can go to the VBEA website and you can say, okay, well, who did this group support? And I'm just going to go with whoever they endorsed. Member mobilization. This can be things like organizing a rally or a march, or organizing a congressional letter writing campaign or congressional calling campaign, where you say, hey, members of this interest group, this bill is coming up to Congress and we want to make sure it passes. So call your senator, call your representative, make sure you contact your member of Congress so we can get this through. If you are trying to mobilize as many of your members as possible, you'll sometimes hear this called a grassroots movement. It starts with the folks at the bottom and builds up instead of vice versa. You're trying to mobilize as many people sort of at the bottom level of the pyramid instead of being the lobbyists or the sort of top-down people. Coalition building is when different interest groups that represent different policy goals work together toward one common goal. So different groups that may represent different constituencies working together toward one common policy goal. This is not a US example, but I happened to be listening to an interview with an activist in France who's representing a movement for racial justice in France. And she was saying that one of the first things she did as an activist, even though she was advocating for racial justice, was she reached out to other groups. So she reached out to the environment movement, to women's movements. She reached out to movements for LGBT rights. And she said her first goal was to get solidarity with these other groups, that she wanted to show that they were sort of all had a common goal in this movement for justice. So she's trying to build a coalition that, even though these groups have different memberships and have worked toward different things, that they are moving together toward a common goal. So different groups with different memberships working together for some common goal. Litigation, if you are an interest group and you're using the courts, so the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is an organization that represents people who they believe their civil liberties have been violated, and they take those issues to court. That would be that's an interest group strategy as well. They are. You may remember that article that I had you all read about the student near Richmond, near where I grew up, who is going to court over his protest during virtual learning, and the ACLU is representing him in court because they believe it's a First Amendment issue. So they're going to use that to advance their policy goals. Amicus curiae briefs, I'm sure I'm still mispronouncing that, but friend of the court briefs, interest groups who are outside of the actual case, neither defendant nor plaintiff, can still file amicus briefs and submit their argument to the court, either on behalf of the defendant or the plaintiff. And then once the election is over, of course, then interest groups are going to use lobbying, where they're going to try to connect with these now elected candidates and get their access time, right? Set up their meetings and say, hey, here's what we expect. Now that we've helped you win, here's what we want from you. Okay, and that's everything on interest groups. If you have any questions, you can definitely send me a Schoology message or an email. You can save them for Tuesday when I see you again. That would be fine. Write them down. Make sure you remember them. You can spend some time now working on your chapter, your reading notes for this chapter for interest groups and or for media, which is the next chapter. And I'll make sure those are posted on Schoology. And at the last page of your notes is sort of a grid of some interest groups that you may see asked about on the AP exam, things that I've seen come up before. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to go through that grid and see if you can at least identify what each group is, kind of what their focus is, and if they have a bent of like conservative or liberal, identifying that as well. So spend some time doing some research on some of those interest groups and see what you come up with. And then if you've got questions on that, certainly we can talk about that on Tuesday as well. But that's what you can do for the remainder of your time during this class. And again, I apologize for not being with you by Zoom, but this works. So glad we could connect virtually in this way. And like I said, I will see you all on Tuesday.